It's hard to call any studio truly the greatest, but I don't think anyone has or ever will match Irrational Games' ability to write a premise. Be it a sole survivor of a plane crash discovering an underwater city, or a washed up detective propelled into the sky just to kidnap a girl. This was a studio that could get you invested within their worlds within a matter of minutes. But it wasn't just that promise of a captivating story that drew you in. They understood the sheer enchantment that came with discovery. And System Shock 2 was certainly no different.
Look at you, hacker. A pathetic creature of meat and bone, panting and sweating as you run through my corridors. How can you challenge a perfect, immortal machine?
Even in the 1960s, we were enraptured with the idea of artificial intelligence and its ever-growing potential in our everyday lives. The comfort, the sophistication it promised to bring humanity, but also the horror of it falling outside of our control. Perhaps 2001: A Space Odyssey is a film that can't be fully appreciated on initial watch. Frankly, I can't blame you if you found the long shots of space to be dull, or were underwhelmed by the introduction of the monolith. But I can guarantee that anyone who has watched this film was glued to their screen after the introduction of the HAL 9000. We all sat there on the edge of our seats mesmerized at the sheer destruction this rogue AI managed to cause in only a handful of minutes. The insurmountable task of man to survive being swallowed alive, resting in the belly of its own creation. Perhaps the fascination came from the idea of a killer that could feel no remorse. After all, an artificial being can never commit an act of passion. It can never understand anger, jealousy, or even sadness. It can only kill through cold, unfeeling calculation. On February 3rd, 2114, the Starship Von Braun began its maiden voyage, its humanity's crowning achievement being the first ship to ever support faster-than-light travel. But 5 months into its maiden voyage, 76 trillion miles from Earth, they receive a distress signal in the Tau City system. It's decided that a rescue team will be assembled and sent to the surface of Tau City 5 to investigate. Surprisingly led by Anatoly Kerenchkin and William Diego, both captains of the Von Braun and the UNM military ship Rickenbacker respectively, arguably the two most important individuals on this journey. But Kerenchkin dreams of making first contact with extraterrestrial life, of the fame, the money, and the grants it will bring, while Diego, having a personal vendetta against Kerenchkin and the Trioptimal Corporation, refuses to give him the satisfaction. So both men decide to head down to the surface, yet no one could be ready for what was about to return with them. When the shuttle finally returns after 5 days, the crew is horrified to see most of Kerenchkin's hair has fallen out. Lumps have formed on the side of his neck, and then there's of course the eggs. In the shuttle lies a multitude of sickening puke green eggs, giving off a faint heartbeat if you stood close enough to it. In his eyes, however, Kerenchkin's health is a minor issue, as he orders the crew to unload them on the deck 3 of the Von Braun, and then the seal is shut. However, that wouldn't be the only thing that would return from the surface with them, as a UNN officer, Bayliss, would grab a mysterious data wafer found on the surface and turn it over to Janice Polito, the head scientist and computer engineer of the Von Braun. And so she patiently begins her work of deciphering the artifact in the comfort of her office. In just 5 days, the ship's 2 most important figures have already been compromised. This is the very ship that you will awaken on. Today, the Von Braun may not look as stunning as a Raptor or Columbia with its dated textures, identical corridors, and lack of enemy variety. But in terms of atmosphere, it's simply unmatched. Those identical corridors created a sense of paranoia and confusion as the player comes to terms with the fact that they are trapped in a labyrinth. Landmarks are key, your map is a lifeline, while Polito barks orders at you, demanding that you fight for your life. Yet the first time explorer cannot merely rush their way into a corridor, not unless if they want to become Swiss cheese or pulled apart by a swarm of annelids. This is a game that demands patience. Your threats are not small and your enemies have played their cards very well. The near entirety of Diego's 120 trained men have now been mutated, while most of the ship's security has been reprogrammed to attack any creature it deems a threat. Even the ship's central intelligence, Xerxes, has been corrupted. Add on the fact that paranoia has sent the ship into lockdown by its very own staff, and now you truly understand that every corner holds the potential of the unknown. When you see a body hang from a grate, legs first, you can't help but wonder just what kind of being could apply that much force onto a grown man, and could it still be roaming around? The Dark Engine has never been great at creating human models, but here, it almost seems to add to the horror. You just become fixated on their bizarre, perverted expressions, soaking in every detail as your mind wanders over every individual's final moments. Despite being called one in the first sentence of his Wikipedia article, I never hear survival horror enthusiasts discuss this game. Surprising considering the keycard and locked door system, it's very reminiscent of early Resident Evil, not to mention the open large-scale environments and emphasis on resource management too. Ammo is so incredibly precious in this game, with even your weapons deteriorating with use. You'll find yourself in the beginning of this game leaning on your wrench, not necessarily because you enjoy melee combat, which you probably won't, but because you never know when a 6-ton robot will come walking down that hall. Even energy-based weapons are required to be recharged at designated stations, including even some pieces of armor. That is, if you even meet the skill requirements to wear them. As a player, you not only have to ask yourself, am I capable of taking down this enemy, but can I afford to? Would it not be better for me to come back or even to sneak past them instead? It gives an incredible sense of weight to every shot that you fire, a real pain of regret when you miss, as you actively watch your lifeline deplete with every single shot. The limited resources are a great way to get players to experiment and actively understand the arsenal within their classification. Throw in the fact that enemies have resistances and weaknesses to certain weapons or ammo types, and you provide an environment that requires a player to constantly think on their feet. Despite the assault rifle being the most powerful standard weapon in the game, I still felt myself actively panicking every time a hybrid launched itself at me, as I desperately cycled through my ammo types trying not to get hit. It's such a great way to keep the tension from ever leaving. Just imagine the chest-tightening claustrophobia that sets in when you walk down a corridor, realize your clip is empty, and realize there's no way around your opponent. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of System Shock 2 is that no area is truly off limits to your enemy. There are no safe rooms, no way to lock a door behind you, and while enemies may not be able to spawn in every single location, that doesn't mean they can't find you. They work on RNG, meaning that no matter how many times you clear a floor or beat this game, the threat is ever present and unpredictable. Doing something as basic as reading your map becomes incredibly unsettling because you're forced to leave yourself completely helpless. Some players might rightfully find that frustrating, but from an immersion standpoint, it makes complete sense. After all, where's the logic of a massive force not being able to follow you behind a closed door? It's easy to forget that the reason we play these games is to be scared, and if that tension is never broken, then our experience is only that much more heightened. It even makes backtracking feel utterly daunting rather than annoying, important in a game that has so much of it. Because you can never truly feel safe, you're constantly tense, on edge, and it slowly eats at you psychologically where even the slightest sound will have you turning your head. When the initial hysteria has settled on my expedition of the Von Braun, the first thing that I had noticed was the ambient hum that envelops you. I looked out the window only to see a vast sea of stars staring back at me. It was beautiful, but then I felt a chill pass over me. There is no sound of space, is there? This is only the simple hum of the ship's engine idling, a constant, inescapable reminder that you are 67 trillion miles from any form of human life. What's the most disturbing part about space? The endless darkness, the frigid cold, maybe that vast unknown. For me, it's always been that lack of sound. There's always been something deeply unsettling about silence to me. The immediate sense of isolation. The way it forces you to interact with sensations you so desperately try to ignore. I noticed on my second watch of 2001: A Space Odyssey that the moments I found the most disturbing were always the ones where Kubrick had cut off the sound. The haunting realization that Hal can read the lips of the crew planning his assassination is met with a similar ambience found on the Von Braun. The slow, painful shot of Frank's body floating into the void is equally met with a dead silence. I don't think it's the silence that creates the fear, rather it's the removal of familiarity here that System Shock is preying on. It forces us to engage whether we want to or not. When one moment you could be walking through a clean, sterile environment, and the next it's something out of a slasher film, it's hard for moments like these not to imprint themselves onto the player. It's just a survival instinct, something deeply ingrained in all of us. It goes to show you that effective horror doesn't need a jump scare or even body horror. All it merely takes is a sense of discomfort, and nothing does that faster than dead silence. Perhaps it's about time we introduce the other studio who made this game a reality, Looking Glass Studios. If no one could write a premise like Irrational did, then there was no one in the industry that understood sound design quite like Looking Glass. They revolutionized the playing field with the original Thief the Dark project, not just being the first stealth game to introduce light as a game mechanic, but sound as well. Your survival in this game was dependent on your ability to pinpoint the sound of a guard's footsteps, to understand how walking on tile, carpeting, or even stone affected the sound you made, and in turn how to plan your heist accordingly. While on the surface, System Shock 2 and Thief seem to carry no similarities besides a shared engine, the way that you can tell that this is a game made by Looking Glass is that attention to detail in the sound design. One of my favorite examples is how every enemy has a distinct audio cue, be it a soft robotic murmur or a faint heartbeat. This might seem like a minor detail, but the frustration that often comes with unforeseen deaths in a video game typically stems from the player's inability to prepare for that said threat. A lot of games try to solve this by highlighting enemies on a map or outright placing pins. But not only is this immersion breaking, in a horror game, that element of surprise is crucial. The genius of System Shock 2's audio cues is that while they're distinct enough to present this idea of an imminent threat, they're left vague enough that pinpointing an exact location is often difficult. In this way, the tension is heightened, as your anxiety builds awaiting the inevitable confrontation. When hearing a door slide open or the quick movement of footsteps can be the difference between life or death, it gives the player a reason to become invested in their surroundings. This means when a panel suddenly explodes off a wall, for instance, you're much more likely to be scared out of your mind. Sound design is critical to creating effective horror, so shouldn't every developer give the player a reason to pay attention? This is a critical reason why a game from 1999 could still leave your skin crawling. After all, while the distorted features of a hybrid are certainly enough for anyone to view them as a threat, they don't strike fear by their appearance alone anymore. Rather, it's the first time that you hear one say, "Kill me," that makes you stop cold in your tracks. You've killed maybe half a dozen of these beings without hesitation up to this point, but with a single phrase, an unwanted thought enters your head. Are these creatures sentient? Are the people being controlled by this unknown threat able to comprehend the acts that they are committing? Your main antagonist in this game is a hive mind called the Many. Their goal is not to wipe out humanity, but rather to assimilate it into itself. In fact, there's an argument to be made here that the Many could provide a better future for humanity. If we were all one being, would it not end conflict, poverty, or even hunger? By absorbing all life, it in turn means we become immortal, eliminating the very idea of death in of itself. They speak of ending pollution, violence, and discord on the earth, and maybe they could achieve it. In many ways, it reflects the moral dilemmas presented by Neon Genesis Evangelion's Human Instrumentality Project. Is peace worth the sacrifice of our own individuality? Is there something not inherently dangerous about a single mind deciding the fate of an entire species? After all, while conflict may lead to suffering, it's also a vital key to progress, to evolution. If we were unable to decide or think on our own, then how is it no better than being dead? I'd argue what makes the Many so genuinely terrifying is their inability to consider these questions. In their mind, individuality will always lead to suffering, and that justifies the ends to the means. And their methods are utterly ruthless in achieving those goals. The females come in the form of an annelid that forces its way into the body of its victim, like a parasite growing within the host. But you see, unlike say the affected in The Last of Us who lose their higher brain function, these parasites only take control of the user's central nervous system. It's like mixing a nightmare with a bad dose of sleep paralysis, as you're forced to watch helplessly as anyone who is capable of resisting, your friends, your co-workers, or even maybe your lover, are brutally murdered by your hands.
What do you know? Bronson was right after all. I imagine I've got about an hour, but I'm tracking the transformations in the hope that the data might be useful to someone else. There are tumors on my leg and back. I can feel that thing inside me, chewing, growing fat.
It's enough to send a chill down anyone's spine as they point the barrel of a shotgun at you, only to utter a devastating two-word phrase.
I'm sorry.
But I think the most terrifying part of the Many is that they don't necessarily have to enforce their will on you. They merely just entice you. They have gained the ability to symphonically persuade others and in turn, manipulate them. When you hear most people speak in the middle of a conversion, it almost sounds like they're getting some strange arousal from it.
I believe the plans the Many have for me are greater than I even imagined. The change is upon me, that the path is more glorious than we imagined. It does not stop at a mere single mutation. The form I've been promised is more beautiful than even that. They tell me I will float through the air and strike at the foes of our biomass with my mind. With our mind, my cup runneth over.
The most easily persuaded just don't have their minds corrupted, but in some cases, lose their entire bodies. This thing was once the captain of the Von Braun. Yes, this is Captain Anatoly Kerenchkin. Musician Tom Waits once called a song a form of time travel. Quote, "They really have moved forward in a bubble. Everyone who's connected with it, the studio's gone, the musicians are gone, and the only thing that's left is this recording." The collapse of these two ships is not one that will be directly conveyed to you. Rather, it is recollected through fragments of the past that we call audio logs. And in many ways, System Shock enthralls us with its story in a similar vein as a found footage craze that began that very same year. While certainly not the first of its kind, the Blair Witch Project was a smash hit, making $250 million on a budget estimated to be less than $1 million. Perhaps with the rise of the internet, camcorders, and CDRs, only now did the found footage medium seem to make sense. After all, it was one thing to watch a film shot on 35mm, but something shot from a camcorder? Well, couldn't your everyday layman shoot something like that? There's something just incredibly raw about that intimacy. By removing the theatrics we commonly associate with the medium, there's a sense of realism and believability added back to it, allowing for a much easier suspension of disbelief. Yet, what if we were to remove that footage altogether? What if our imagination was forced to fill in those blanks? It's guaranteed to put you right into the line of fire. After all, no one understands what revolts you more than yourself. It's a genius way to tell a horror story because of the intimacy it provides the audience. After all, the information isn't secondhand, it's a first-hand account from the very victims themselves. You vividly understand the horror, confusion, and regret that every individual felt in their final moments.
The time is 16:30. Autopsy subject A. Watson. Now we're going to make the first incision in... Hold him down. I'm trying to! I'm trying!
One of the most horrifying moments for me in this game was listening to the slow descent into madness of Mark Miller. Being the active supervisor of the hydroponics deck, it only made logical sense that Mark would be in charge of the eggs after Anatoly ordered for their placement on Deck 3. For Mark, it was the highest honor. He was going to be the first man who personally saw to the protection and research of humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial life. Yet by the end of this first log, you could tell something is off, noted by the ominous line of,
"They're so helpless, I feel somehow compelled to protect them."
Log by log, day by day, you could tell something is changing within Mark Miller. Despite a general understanding that the eggs are toxic, when they begin to die under his care, Mark's partner becomes so overcome with emotion that he practically throws himself over top of the eggs, refusing to leave their side, and it leads to his death. Yet, Mark refuses to give up so easily, so he develops a plan. He begins to create blueprints for cybernetic enhancements to make a human being invincible to those said toxins. A noble cause until Nurse Bloom finds them and conveys just how illegal they really are.
I found these schematics on Dr. Miller's desk. They're plans for the kind of cyber modification that's been illegal for 40 years. It's not like him.
Most notable being the entire lower half of the individual having to be removed for the mechanical components. But you want to know what's even more shocking?
The DNA sequence he spec'd for the prototype. It's mine.
I've chosen Nurse Bloom as the new mother to our children. She is sweet and kind, healthy and a perfect match. She has a child of her own back on Earth. She knows what it is to care for their young. Ave Maria. If she only knew what the future held.
16 nurses Mark Miller calls to his deck, and not a single one ever returns. For me, the moment that makes or breaks a piece of horror is the first quarter of your story. So many artists struggle balancing investment with tension, and it's understandable that building good tension takes time, but that should never come at the cost of your audience's engagement. I've seen so many horror movies that have me hooked by their climax, but it felt unjustified when I had to slog through 30 minutes of boring exposition first. The reason John Carpenter's The Thing has remained the pinnacle of this entire medium for me is because in a matter of 5 minutes, he has you invested in his story. The film starts with a basic premise: a helicopter trying to chase down a husky in the middle of the Arctic. Weird, but not a huge deal, right? That is, until you realize these men on board are trying to kill this dog. And when I say kill, I mean by any means possible. When a sniper rifle doesn't get the job done, they go straight to bombing the poor thing out of existence. When these men land, they are so terrified of this animal, they attack our main cast without any hesitation, just to take it out. Just what in the world happened? Suddenly, it doesn't matter how long it takes for the threat to actually appear, because you're hooked. You want to know what they were hiding. You know what's the fastest way to get a player invested in the world that you're creating? Throw them into the middle of a hellfire. I promise you they'll be looking for any information they possibly can to figure out what the heck happened. And that's the real genius of the audio logs. It allows the developers to throw their players into the middle of their story without any of the exposition that might bore them. Better yet, since they're entirely optional, experienced players can outright skip them if they know the plot. Note, however, while every entry is dated, tells the recipient and the floor it belongs to, they only provide enough information for the player to just barely piece this plot together. You will never have a full picture of what truly happened on these ships. There will always be an air of uncertainty, of unease, no matter how many times you awaken onto the Von Braun. From the moment you gain consciousness, the first voice you'll be greeted with is the head scientist and engineer, Janice Polito. You don't know much about your circumstances due to the memory authorization failing, but she makes it clear that reaching Deck 4 has to be achieved for any chance of survival. She becomes your lifeline as she carefully explains your capabilities, the ship's mechanics, and provides you with any cybernetic modules to upgrade your implants. If anyone can overcome this hostile takeover, she may be the only one left alive on this ship. So you fight tooth and nail, just barely overcoming every threat in question. And yet, when I have reached Deck 4 to finally meet my hero, I instantly understood that something was incredibly wrong. Once again greeted with that crushing cold silence. You enter the room to find Polito dead. The cause, most likely self-inflicted.
The Polito form is dead, insect. Are you afraid? What is it you fear?
The end of your trivial existence? When the history of my glory is written,
Your species shall only be a footnote to my magnificence.
Then the walls tear down around you to introduce your real savior, Shodan. The rogue AI 42 years earlier that has single-handedly led to the downfall of Citadel Station. An incident so horrendous that it will go down in history as one of the biggest acts of genocide in human history. This is an AI so dangerous that an entire branch of government had to be created from the aftermath. The moment Janice Polito entered the fragments of the artifact into the ship's systems, it was already too late. Shodan personally made sure that she couldn't escape and then began impersonating her, setting her initial plans into motion, which includes having both your mind and body involuntarily altered. There's something utterly mesmerizing about listening to Shodan speak. The way that every sentence and phrase sounds distinctly unique from the last.
From the hushed whispers, the slurs, or the rotting distortion.
It creates a fixation on every single syllable that is ushered. An uncanny valley where our mind is in a constant state of conflict to find something human, and a being that has surpassed her capabilities long ago. A rogue AI's desire to take over a ship is certainly nothing new in science fiction, but the deeply fascinating aspect of Shodan is that when this AI had reached the end of its capabilities, it takes control of something far easier. You. She has guided you through this ship in order to establish what she calls trust. And like a mouse in a maze, you followed your path, desperately clinging to every cybernetic module that she could give you. But what other choice did you have? To be maimed like everyone else on this ship? To be made a slave of a hive mind? But now your body is merely a vessel. It's a perfect symbol of how Shodan's ambitions not only lie in taking over the ship, but to have supreme control over all living life, to shape the universe into her image. She takes a sick pleasure in seeing you shaped into her likeness and abandoning your humanity. That's the only value you'll ever hold in her eyes.
My avatar.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting it. A reminder not necessarily to the character of their position, but to you, the player. You are a mere pawn in Shodan's overall scheme.
Do not presume to go in there, insect.
And any act of rebellion is retroactively met with a consequence entirely outside of your control.
I hope you enjoyed our little rebellion, irritant.
But perhaps the most terrifying thing of all is the realization that these monsters, this hive mind, is a creation entirely of her own. I would be remiss not to mention System Shock 2's clear influence from the Alien franchise. The tight, claustrophobic corridors of a ship stranded in space, the parasitic creatures that inhabit the body of their prey. Heck, even the eggs are directly lifted from the films. But maybe less obvious are the political influences, because at the heart of Ridley Scott's landmark film was more than just an unfortunate crew slowly being hunted by a ravenous life form. Rather, it was a larger commentary on corporate corruption. The crew, much like the Von Braun, launched themselves onto the surface of a foreign planet to explore an unknown source of intelligent life. So the ship is stopped, they prepare the pod, and what happens next is comparable to a living hell. Yet the choice was never theirs to begin with, it was their company's. According to Weyland-Yutani, it is company policy to investigate, quote, any systemized transmission indicating intelligent origin. And if there was any doubt that the company had merely included the clause in the event of, say, stranded crew members, it's completely snuffed out when Warrant Officer Ellen Ripley discovers a damning message given to the Science Officer Ash. Special Order 937. Priority number 1. Ensure return of organism for analysis. All other considerations secondary. Crew expendable. The story of Alien and its sequel are not ones of humanity's struggles against an unstoppable species. After all, humanity has shown to be a threat to the Xenomorph's very existence. Rather, it's a self-evaluation, a study of how mankind is losing a battle against its greatest enemy, itself. Even millions of light years away from Earth, our incompetence is still humanity's greatest threat.
You know, Burke, I don't know which species is worse. You don't see them fucking each other over for a goddamn percentage.
If you find it suspicious that the Von Braun, a ship meant for scientific discovery, had to be accompanied by a crew of trained military personnel, then you might not be surprised to learn that Trioptimum, the creators of the ship, were directly responsible for one of the largest catastrophes in human history, the creation of Shodan and the Citadel Station crisis. By purposely removing the moral constraints on the station's AI, it nearly led to the entire extinction of human life and of itself, evident by the horrific mutations that Shodan began performing on its crew. The United National Nominant, or the UNN for short, being a direct response to that said disaster in order to stop the influence of mega corporations. William Diego, the captain of the Rickenbacker, being the direct son of Edward Diego, the vice president of Trioptimum, who was also the largest player in the disaster of Citadel Station. He personally made it his mission to be assigned to this ship, knowing the risks that could be involved. There's something almost comical in discovering that the pod on Tau City 5 was a byproduct of the Citadel Station disaster. The many were no extraterrestrial life, they were leftover from Shodan's grand experiments that had just grown outside of her control. Once again, Trioptimum had been foiled by its own creation. Greed had led to its greatest disaster, and greed, once again, would be its undoing. It's an irony that just cuts through you like a knife. The countless lives lost, the horrific mutations, it all could have been avoided. Humanity always wanted to play God, and in turn, they got their wish. They made their goddess, and now the whole world is a sandbox for her to rebuild and destroy. The only reason you weren't killed the moment you awoke on this ship was because she had decided from the beginning to make you the ace in the hole. Shodan views humans as so utterly insignificant that she had concluded that they would be better off as an energy source to birth an entirely new species. Remember, the only reason the many can consume human beings is because Shodan had designed it. She wanted a species that lacked moral constraints, emotions, and individualism. Yet the scale of that horror only truly dawns on the player after they discover what's left of the Rickenbacker. In the matter of 30 days, the entire ship has assimilated into one massive living, breathing organism. There's a panic that just washes over you as you begin to understand that maybe Shodan was right. Could you have restored power without her guidance, clear the infection blocking the elevator, regain access to the bridge? Was this infection not a result of our failure to learn from our past mistakes? Even if you do manage to take her down, would it really prove anything? After all, it wouldn't be raw human ingenuity, it would be the very implants that she put into you herself. As she puts it, you are a reflection of Shodan herself. The story of System Shock 2 is one of flesh and steel, of life and machine. One represents a controlled, sterile assessment of progress, where life only exists to test a hypothesis and then gather the solution. The other, the uncontrollable lust of biology to conquer every square inch of its environment. Both desire only one thing: utter dominance, yet their very natures deny such coexistence. And being an individual made up of both, you are a living representation of that struggle. Your decisions will shape the future of mankind to come. So, by actively killing the many with your very own hands, you have decided there is no more place for the flesh. And that's the power of System Shock's writing. It's not a warning to keep artificial intelligence under control, rather it's a dawn, a realization that we never could have hoped to contain it.
Tommy, what's the matter, lover? Don't you like my new look?
Its very existence is a threat to life in of itself.
With only a few short years of evolution, they've been able to conquer this starship, mankind's mightiest creation. Where were we after 40 years of evolution? What swamp were we swimming around in, single-celled and mindless? What if Shodan's creations are superior to us? What will they become in 1 million years, in 10 million years? What's clear is that Shodan shouldn't be allowed to play God. She's far too good at it.